It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. All right, in keeping with a trend, I thought we would discuss another how to never topic. So today I wanted to talk to you about how to never carry work over from one sprint to another. Now, this is one that I can tell you drives people crazy. When I tell people that in my entire career as an agilist, for as long as I've been doing this, forever, I'm talking since 2003, 19 years worth, yes? That what I can tell you is in that period, I've only carried two items over from one sprint to the next. Sounds hard to believe, but it's true. And part of that is when we go in and do coaching, or when I was a scrum master, or when I was a product owner, or when I was working with teams, we would establish some ground rules and some mentality and put some things in place to let people know what the proper technique or the proper way to handle work was so that this could never, ever happen. So let's start with some of the baseline things. So the very first thing right out of the gate, rather, the grate. Well, it could be a grate if you're grating your skin because you're so frustrated. But the very first thing right out of the gate would be talking about how teams need to understand and have a team working agreement. They need to understand each other and they need to understand how they're going to work and in what environment. And I think that if they create a team working agreement that, for example, talks about how they facilitate interruptions or who's responsible for which things or how they're going to operate with work in progress limits, WIP limits, or what they plan to do in meetings and how they plan on structuring things, that the team working agreement is the first key to helping organizations not be able to carry work over. And I know you're probably thinking, how are those two related? The answer is the team working agreement gives you a roadmap or a guide to know how to handle some of the things that cause the interruptions that cause the work to go over. So, right out of the gate, the very first thing you need to do is make sure that your team has a working agreement in place. And not only that they have the working agreement in place, but that leadership buys into that agreement to help prevent work from carrying over. Okay, let's get to the next one. The next one's a big one, number two. This is learning to invest. Now, I know what you're thinking. What does investing have to do with this? Well, it is the acronym from Bill Wake. So many, many moons ago, Bill Wake, he created the acronym INVEST. And this was related to how we, or I should say, when we build backlog items or when we assemble stories, what we should do to help make sure that we can be successful in completing those stories. Now, for those of you who have never heard of INVEST, the I stands for independent. We should avoid dependencies when possible. The N is negotiable. A story should never be written as a contract. It should always be the story is a topic for conversation, right? Mike Cohn said that as well. You want to make sure that it's valuable. If it doesn't provide value, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. The E is for estimable or estimable, because estimatable is not a word. And that means that you should be able to easily look and estimate size or scope of the work. That you should have enough information to say, oh, compared to everything else, that one feels small or medium. You don't necessarily need to put any kind of time-based estimate or any kind of forecast for exactly how long you think it's going to take. I just want you to be able to tell me if it's bigger than a bread box, which leads me to the S, which is sized appropriately. So sized appropriately means that it's different than estimable. Estimable means that I can put a size or scope on it. Sized appropriately means that it's going to be small enough to be consumed in a single sprint. And then T is for testable. That means we need to make sure that everything we build should be tested in some form, fit, or fashion, whether it's an automated test or an optimized test or a simple check from a checklist on a kata card. We just need to make sure we have to have some type of way to test the system or process. So when you learn to invest and you build your backlog items correctly, that makes them more easily consumable. And then the third and final key to this has to do with team commitment. Now, team organization and team commitment is a huge topic, right? What I can tell you is when I'm talking about team commitment, this means that when we're committing to size, we're not doing it as an individual and we're not doing it as a silo. That the team is doing it together so that they can understand the scope of what's being asked for. And sometimes this means having some type of initial estimate to compare to or a benchmark to compare size to so that the team can make sure they have their head around what they believe the size really is for the item. Now, the truth is, I often give this this example, this analogy, when I'm teaching an Agile Foundations class. This analogy goes like this. If we had two teams working together, both teams were doing their job, both teams were doing great. Team A was always, we'll just call them the overachievers, right? They were always looking for new and innovative ways to improve or increase the amount of work they could do. They would always set stretch goals. They were always looking and hoping that they could do more than what they could actually do. This team also consistently carried work over from one sprint to the next. Now they got a lot done. They were certainly very very good at their craft. They got a lot done, but they were always carrying work over from one to the next, from one sprint to the next. Then we had a second team. We'll call them Team B. Team B would always figure out exactly how much work they could do, but then they would quickly assess the work and decide which one item they wanted to remove from their list because they knew that they weren't going to be able to get every single thing done. So they'd remove one item from their list. Even if they felt confident that they could get it all done, they would still remove one item from the list, which is kind of interesting because people would say, why would they do that? But the answer to this question is important. If you were a leader and executive, which team would you like better? Which team would you enjoy working with better? Team A, where they were carrying things over, or Team B, where they committed to one item less, but they consistently got every single thing done that they committed to? And oftentimes they would even pull in an extra item and get that one done too. So they would often finish exactly the same amount of work. And of course, the answer is we all would rather work with Team B because Team B is predictable. And I think that sometimes we forget that little trick that leadership doesn't necessarily want teams to always overextend themselves and always set stretch goals. One of the keys to being successful with Agile is to make sure that you are flexible enough that you can commit to the right amount of work, back one off, and then pull it in if you can at the end. Natural effect of this isn't that the team's padding. I want to be careful because a lot of people accuse this of, oh, that's just a disguise for padding. That's not true. What it is we know the team can consistently do 20 points, for example, or 20 units of work. Now, there are some sprints where the work comes in a little easier and they feel like they can pull in an extra one. But rather than take that risk, they'll still finish their 20 units of work and then they'll start working on a top item in the next sprint, which could be another small item. And if it is and they finish it, well, great, it gets pulled into the current sprint. If they don't finish, it stays where it is in the next sprint and we got a nice head start on it. And I think that if you look at it from that perspective, instead of constantly pulling work into the sprint to work on, that you'll see that you're carrying way fewer items over, that the team's velocity and their workload will remain consistent, and that the team will find great joy in knowing that they can complete the work they committed to, that they'll be applauded for completing the work they committed to, and that they're not being overextended trying to be asked to do many different things. So I think the three key things, one more time, just to make sure we got them all. One is to make sure we have a solid team working room in place so we don't constantly have interruptions and bombardments from outside sources. Two is learning to invest and follow the Bill Wake Invest model so when backlog items are created, we're avoiding all the things that could cause them to be bloated or carry over from one sprint to another. And then finally, we want to make sure that we make sure we take into consideration the team commitment and how they commit to work as a team, and making sure that you're not overloading any sprint. That's going to do it for this episode. If you have a topic you'd like for us to talk about, feel free to reach out. Learn more at agiledad.com, where we'd love to hear from you. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.